Hello and welcome. I'm Andrea Paushan, and this is Still Running Project. And the project gathers insights from well-being professionals about what truly sustains people and performance under pressure. The goal is to bring together real-life voices, practical experience, and patterns that leaders and organizations need to understand right now, because we live in interesting times and there are a lot of changes afoot, especially with AI and technology growing so fast. And well-being brings into conversation a lot of aspects. It's performance, it's operational, it's systems, and overall it's people. And people have had enough of being numbers. So this is where professionals like myself and like Suzanne here present come in and try to change. And change is difficult because our brain fights it. It's not comfortable, even when change is good. We all know it and we still fight it because it's a matter of survival. Welcome, Suzanne Teale. I've met Suzanne a while ago. We were on a networking group together, and I'm going to let her introduce herself first.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm Suzanne Teale, and I'm a mental fitness practitioner and a solution-focused hypnotherapist.
So welcome, and I'm going to start by asking you the same questions I asked everybody else. What made you join this project?
Okay, like you're saying, well-being is such an important part of life, but corporate life. And when you kindly invited me to join the conversation, I think it's a conversation that isn't being had in bigger spaces. So anything that allows this conversation to be heard by more people, I wanted to be a part of. I've obviously, as my title suggests, I'm in the well-being space, and particularly in mental performance and leadership performance, and really all around building mental fitness so that we don't get to a stage where we may be dealing with mental health issues. And I think well-being is a word that's being used a lot, but it has many different meanings for different people and for organizations and businesses. It's how do they build a strategy that supports their employee and people strategy from a well-being perspective with solutions and ideas and support that really does help the individual, which in turn helps business performance. So yeah, when I heard that you were running this project, I was very keen to get involved and share my views.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very keen to get this project out there because, in my opinion, well-being is a bit misunderstood as something that sits outside the current organizational structure. And it's not true. It's something that sits well within it, but it's a part that we've been neglected because why change it before breaking? So I've encountered that a lot. It works, so don't touch it. When in reality, a lot of things can be improved, and people have started to talking more and have had enough. COVID was a big change. The resurgence of AI is a big change, and our nervous systems are really old, so they are not meant to cope with so much change in such a short time. Of course, overwhelm comes up, and in work especially, it's well known, but it's been working so far, so people have been functional. So why change it? What touch it? That's changing the conversation now. And well-being is just a really small part in what otherwise I believe is the performance and the organizational structure of every company that wants to uh, create a great culture for their employees, to grow good managers, good leaders. So that's a deeper conversation we're having, and this is also the scope of this still running project. And thank you so much. The way still running is organized, I send you a list of questions, And then based on those, we have this conversation.
Mhm.
And after filling those questions, I had a look through them and I picked a few that draw my attention. And one of the first one, you talk a lot about mental fitness
Yeah.
and you share your personal experience of how you got there. And you said something, and I'm going to quote you on that because I wrote it down, that stuck with me. Um, you had support for your head. Uh, you went looking for it, and it taught you to sit with difficult thinking, regulate, and keep talking instead of going quiet. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how did it actually work in practice? I mean, you had sessions. How did it feel like to be in that room and go through that process yourself?
Okay, so I think when I think, I'm a big believer in everything is temporary. So, how you're feeling today, you might feel differently tomorrow. It might be around for a longer period of time, depending on what we're all going through. And when I first sought, I suppose, professional support, I was, very successful. I was, doing a job. I was outwardly performing, and we talk about this a lot, don't we? Kind of, we mask because we don't want to be seen as maybe weak if we're struggling. But actually, in my head, I was struggling because I was going through things personally, and that doesn't stop just because I walked into the boardroom or into the office or into a client meeting. And as brilliant as my employers were, and my friends and partner and family were great, I just knew I needed a bit more support in understanding why I was thinking like I was thinking, why I was feeling the feelings I was feeling. And I didn't at that time really understand it. And I Googled kind of, I think my search was something like, help feeling really overwhelmed. And I think when I spoke to the very first therapist I ever spoke to, I think I just said to her, I felt like I was on this ride and it was just going so fast, but I had no control. I was just kind of trying to keep up with it. And in my head, it just was making me feel very disconnected. So when I found the therapist that I started working with, we started to discuss and just break down what I was going through. And then they helped me to understand kind of how my brain was working and how I had more control over those feelings and thoughts than just letting them drag me with it, which was causing me to, at home, I was maybe a bit shorter and bad tempered. In the office, I may have been, a bit quieter. I didn't feel as confident. So the sessions, it was I used hypnotherapy, which is one of the reasons I've kind of retrained in hypnotherapy. Because what we kind of established, I had some really well worn patterns that were under my conscious layer. So rationally, I could understand why I was feeling like I was feeling, busy. I've got a lot on, da, 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 da. But there was feelings underneath that conscious layer that I had to kind of address and deal with, and that really helped me by using hypnosis as a tool to help me undo some of my thought patterns, some of my and we all have it, self-doubt and imposter syndrome and things like that. So the sessions with the therapist were super helpful. They really helped me understand that it wasn't something that I couldn't have some control over. I mean, the environment and some of the issues I was going through at the time were still going to be there. Yeah, that wasn't going to change. But how I reacted, how I responded, and how I felt about things, that's what shifted. And that was a really important thing because it meant I could cope better. It meant I could respond in a way that didn't send me further into a kind of internal dialogue of, negative thinking and spiraling. So the sessions that we had were always, and again, one of the reasons I'm solution focused, we're always about moving forward. We didn't really do a lot of um, lot of backward looking. We kind of worked with what I was feeling today, what I wanted to feel like, what did me feeling better look like, and then we use that. And the sessions the first time, I think probably I was maybe only with the therapist for 6 or 7 weeks. It made such a great difference, like, to my home life, to how I felt about myself, to my thinking. And that was great. So that's where kind of I knew that, and I'd always had a bit of an interest in why we behave like we behave, or why we think like we think. Even as a teenager, I was kind of curious why, you clicked with some people, and just really how we work. So I was very much enjoyed the process of working with someone who could help me from a kind of more clinical, scientific perspective, like get to know myself better. So that's where the whole, after that, I was really quite good at helping myself, helping my headspace, helping clarify my thinking. But I have proudly seen therapists at 3 or 4 different points in my life, and they've always helped me, because it was just sometimes you need a bit more support with your head. We see people for our bodies. We see, we go to the gym to keep ourselves fit. We go to the doctors when we're physically poorly. But there is still this, it's going, but there is still a little bit of a stigma about getting some help when you're not feeling okay in your head and with your thinking and with your thoughts.
And thank you for that. I think we normalized not feeling okay in our heads. We create these stories, these scenarios that are catastrophic, and we always imagine the worst things happening. Then we postpone it, we procrastinate, and then in reality, very few of those catastrophic scenarios do happen. But we are so worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Worked up before that, that our bodies and our nervous system react like we
Yes.
are always in danger, and that's where the overwhelm comes. And one of the most Googled questions is, what is overwhelm? What is burnout? Why am I feeling that? Is what is in my head? So you pointed out very well, and it does start like this. And you are one of the few people, still few, who had the courage to go further and to investigate. And that was a success. But a lot of people are afraid to go there,
Mm.
because what if somebody tells them there's something wrong with them? There is this feeling behind that, if they're feeling that, if they're thinking that, there is something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Did you have that?
Um, I think I had that a little bit, yes, especially, well, the first time especially. And I think the bigger thing was I didn't want to share it with my family and friends, because they might go, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" Why? Um, but I think, again, once I got into the room and had that initial conversation with the therapist and started working with them, it became very clear that this is not about something being broken or something wrong with you. It was more about your habits and your patterns and your thinking. But again, until I started working with a professional, I thought I had no control over my moods, and you absolutely do. Your mood is a choice, but I didn't think, because I just thought, oh, I'm feeling like this, therefore that's me, and it's not. It's something that you can work on, but until you start talking to people, you're only ever in your own head, so you're just in an echo chamber of whatever's being said on repeat. So I think there is that. There was a little bit of nervousness, and I do think what I'm seeing in my private practice, I always have a 15-minute call to check with someone that I can help them, and it's so important that they feel connected and able, that you're a safe space, and particularly in organizations, that's huge, right? You need that psychologically safe environment, but you also need it in a one-to-one private therapy room. But yes, the short answer is yes, I was a bit nervous. I was less feeling nervous about approaching a professional. I was more nervous about sharing with people that I was going to see someone.
Yeah.
um but actually, and then again, as I was coming out of the process, and it was weird because the very first time I used professional therapy, at the end, it was just like, oh my God, yeah, I feel loads better. The first couple of sessions, I didn't know I was feeling any better. And then I was like, all of a sudden, I was like, oh my God, yeah, I'm feeling much better. And then I was able to say to friends and family, oh yeah, I've been seeing such and such a body, and it's just been brilliant. And then I've been a big advocate ever since.
I'm a big advocate of hypnotherapy. I do a different hypnotherapy practice called rapid transformational therapy, which works amazingly. It is
Mm,
very fast and basically connects uh, um, events from the past to the understanding you have today. Because that's, and you mentioned that a lot, subconscious programming. Some things happen to us, and in the moment, we don't have resources to deal
yeah.
with it. So we create coping mechanisms. And those coping mechanisms, instead of just being used once, they're being transformed into patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and those patterns are not useful anymore. So that when different type of thoughts appear, or when we don't feel comfortable anymore. So you mentioned a lot this subconscious programming, and you
Yeah.
work with it a lot as well, the same as I am, in a
Mm-hmm.
different modality, still
Yeah.
hypnotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit more about that. How did it work for you? How does it work for your clients? How would it work in an organization?
Okay, so I think addressing the elephant in the room, the hypnotherapy that you and I do is not stage hypnosis, right? So it's very underwhelming. It's not,
Yeah.
I'm not going to make you forget your name or cook like a chicken. It's not stage hypnosis. So I enjoyed or I do enjoy when because I do self hypnosis as well. So for me, when I was working with therapists who brought hypnotherapy into the therapy room, I enjoyed that sense of relaxation, of letting go, of just being very, very calm with, I suppose, just having a bit of a break, just turning yourself off. That's probably not, that isn't necessarily how everyone feels, but for me, it just quieted the chatter, the noise, and just allows me to have that break. And I get time distortion in hypnotherapy when I'm having hypnosis, so it can feel like 2 minutes when it's been kind of half an hour. But even so, I feel very, I feel very rested. I feel very calm. I feel very relaxed. And obviously, any of the suggestions or the conversations, the visualizations we bring into trance. And this is what I do with my clients. We focus on building, because your brain really likes visuals as opposed to words. So we'll kind of build a visualization of what they're working towards, what goals they want to achieve, how they want. And it could be anything, it might be more of a feeling. I want to feel calmer. I want to have more confidence. I want to feel X, Y, and Z. And from a conscious state where they're coming into the therapy room, where they're feeling maybe not confident, they're doubting their decisions, they're not sure how they feel about a subject, or they've got a big presentation coming and they need extra performance confidence to do that. And then we kind of build that visualization and we take that into trance. And when we're in that hypnotic state, you're not asleep, um, you are not paying attention. In fact, your brain is really focused. But what we're doing is just talking to the subconscious, and we're embedding those more helpful, positive thought patterns and commands that are going to help my clients think differently, behave differently, and absorb it without your critical prefrontal cortex going, but that isn't how you behave. That isn't what you do. We're very safe in our lack of confidence, because that's who we've been for the last however long. So I really enjoy the process of hypnosis. I really like it with my clients. And I think where it's people are a bit nervous is maybe feeling that there's no control in that. But some of the sessions that I do with clients will be talking while you're in trance. It's not just a passive um it's not just a passive process. So sometimes, it can be very relaxing, and it's kind of, me using language and words with you. But sometimes you'll be talking with me. We'll be kind of looking at a visualization that you're doing in trance together. So it's not as passive as people think, and it's not about control. In fact, it's just about letting you drift and letting your subconscious, which we know runs most of the show, um, you know, really have time to start reworking and start helping you build new neural pathways that start that habit behavior change, so that you're not playing that narrative that's been playing on autopilot since you were maybe 7 or 20 or whatever it is.
Um, and I'm familiar with this. The toughest thing is for people to actually imagine something good, because I asked if you had a magic wand,
Yes,
and
the miracle
when we
question.
finish 6 months from now, when
Yeah,
we've done with everything, your life is exactly like you wanted. Describe that life to me. And that's hard for people
yeah,
because they're so mired in everyday circumstances, in the problem, in what's wrong. They have issue verbalizing and actually imagining
yes,
what a life without the problem could be.
yeah,
So part of the things I'm encountering is getting people to open enough to be able to actually say, oh, my life can actually change. And it
yeah.
could be better. I could feel that. But verbalizing it and saying, I would feel like this, and I would smell this, and I would hear this, and people would perceive me in such and such way, it's actually quite difficult.
Really difficult. And I think that's one of the reasons I really love the solution focused approach, right? Because we use that miracle question and we take it week by week. So right, what we're going to look at, what is it, what's our goal for this week? And it's really small steps, so that every small step eventually stacks and becomes, you know embedded change. But it allows them to slowly build and start recognizing themselves, because it is hard, because it also almost feels a bit of a, oh, well, I want to be this very, I don't know, let's say I want to be a really confident person. I want to get a promotion. I want to do this, that, and the other. It can almost feel a bit like you're asking for too much of yourself, or you're feeling a bit boastful, or maybe you believe that you shouldn't have that. And that simply is not true. But you have to work through those small steps to start believing that actually, yes, I could get that promotion. And yes, I would get that promotion. And I would also be very good at that job. And I would also be respected in that role. But that is really hard, particularly at the start when you're working with someone at the beginning who might have these feelings of, lack of confidence or self-doubt. Like you say, it can be so, it can be really impossible to get to those visualizations. So for me, it's really important that we keep things really small and manageable, that we so in my therapy room, kind of a session is split between a bit of talk therapy, solution focused talk therapy, and then we go into trance and hypnosis, and we use hypnosis as a tool. So for me, the talking is the therapy. This is where we're starting to go, just there to imagine that very first step, which might just be applying for the promotion. you know but yeah, you're absolutely right, and that can stop people even coming for help in the first place, because I don't really know what I want. I just know I don't want to feel like this. But I think that's part of our job as well, isn't it? To help people clarify what they want, and what success is for them as an individual, because success is different for everyone.
Hey, I agree. I agree, and this is why change is so difficult in organizations, because the
Yes.
same principles apply at a much bigger scale. But again, starting with one and then adding having a compound effect, small changes, testing it works, and then going back again and again. And there will be things that don't work because the patterns have been there for years
Mm.
in an organization that has been applying the same rules for a decade. There's inertia, so a lot of moving parts just fighting this change. We as individuals fight this change because the patterns keep on wanting to reassert themselves, and there is practice behind it. So I give my clients recording to listen to for a number
Mhm.
of days.
Yeah,
And guess what? They don't. So they stop. They listen to for a couple of days and
yeah,
everything is fine. And then they stop and they say it's not working. So that goes for individuals. And of course, in organization, they try something for a month. It kind of works and
yeah.
then it stops working because something happens. And another part of the puzzle is brought in at the surface. So how do you manage that?
With difficulty. So, okay, yeah, so from an organizational perspective, you're absolutely right, because organizations want results, and we all come together strategically and we build the plan, and then everyone goes away and takes their part of the plan. But it's very much a joint effort, isn't it? There's no such thing as a perfect leader. We all might be technically skilled in our fields. We all might be very, very capable. But particularly at leadership level, I think there's an element of we don't keep developing our leaders. So to your point, we're not listening to the recordings because you're a leader, you're C-suite, or you're an MD, or you're the CEO, and therefore you should have all the answers, or you should have a team around you who has all the answers. Um, but if we're not giving ourselves and our teams the space to keep practicing, implementing, testing, then we're going to make decisions with incomplete information. But coming back to what we do around well-being, and this is where well-being gets a bit more scientific, what does that do to your nervous system when you're thinking as a commercial director, I haven't hit my sales numbers again this month, and my team hasn't? Your nervous system is going to become dysregulated. You're potentially going to be in a heightened state of stress and arousal, and then you start making decisions that are not helpful. So you might go off the strategy and revert to something, you know. And I think I think when you talk to leaders, they recognize this, but I think collectively we don't go into boardrooms and notice that people might be going off plan or changing direction or forcing a new agenda. And if that person's quite strong and vocal and we're not feeling very confident, we might not say anything. So it's really hard that for organizations, you really do need to invest in the well-being and emotional regulation and the mental fitness. That's, for me, that's what we need in corporations, is that your leaders are able to stick with the strategy and the plan even under pressure, even when it's going wrong or the wheels are threatening to come off. Likewise, that might be the time that you have to stand up and say, look, this isn't going to the plan that we all thought. Can we come back together? But it's coming at that for organizations, that those leaders have got enough self-trust, and their mental performance is in a place that then doesn't start causing friction and tension with other people in the group, with other leaders at the table, friction between the CEO. And so for me, it's about organizations helping people keep their mental performance and their mental well-being in a really good place, not getting into stressful situations, making sure that when they are coming together, whether it's strategic conversation or tactical conversations and plans, that everyone feels really safe to either offer an alternative view or opinion, challenge something. And you mentioned AI at the very beginning. In the age of generative AI now, where human judgment is now far more important than ever, because we can't just take the AI version of what we've asked for without a human sense checking that, and being brave enough to say, I don't think this is right. So yeah, for me, I think in organizations, building that mental fitness and maintaining your capacity to be able to support when you need to support, challenge when you need to challenge, persevere under pressure, or, you know, be brave enough to say, I think we need to pull the plug on this. You know, they're all acts of courage and bravery. And if your thinking isn't clear, those decisions could be made from a very unhelpful position.
Absolutely. And it is difficult. And we are taught, and we are taught really early on, and then we teach ourselves over and over to ignore our body reactions, the way our breaths stutter and cut off, the way our skin reacts, um, different aches and pains that appear anywhere, that are signals something is wrong. And ignoring it can only make it worse. But when in pressure and when automatic reactions like fight, flight, freeze, where most of corporate employees are right now
Mm-hmm.
without knowing due to
Yep.
the overwhelm and continuous stress, it's become a habit. And it's not about breaking the habit, because breaking the habit is hard. It's about interrupting it enough to
Yes.
get to a different state and make decisions from that different state.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of conversations with different leaders who want change to be straight and look, I do this and we have this result. And it's never that straightforward.
No.
So building that resilience, that mental fitness, like you said, but at the same time taking care
Mm.
that we make decisions from a place of well-being,
Yes.
not from a place of failure. Because when something that doesn't work, we think we fail.
Yep.
We try. There is a plan in place, so there is meeting, there is support, and guess what? It doesn't work. So that's a failure. Instead of being a lesson, instead of being
Yeah.
the next step, because it's never a complete failure. Something did work right,
Mm.
and then it stopped working, so we need to tweak and twist and find
Adapt.
different solutions.
Mm.
But it's that
Yeah.
moment when you feel like a failure, that's very difficult, and it hits you, and
Yeah.
it creates a pattern.
It really does. And that is a prime example of when we talk about maybe our inner critic or our inner voice, which may be quite negative. You know, that could come from a situation like that, that then it becomes your, you know, your default thought. You know, it will limit your creative thinking because you think, oh, you know, the last thing didn't work, I failed. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna share that idea. And in business, you don't want people who feel suppressed or not able to innovate or create because they're not, they haven't got that regulation and that resilience that they've built. So you're right, that I always talk about with my clients, the power of a pause, you know. And you're right, it is so important because that nervous system is automatic. It kind of kicks in, and again it comes back to you having to be mindful that that's kicked in, and now I need to just take a moment, I need to just think before I, you know, respond rather than reacting. And that is super important in businesses, because otherwise a knee-jerk reaction, and especially if that comes from, you know, the very top, again, people will struggle to challenge. It's because that's also a difficult position to manage upwards, isn't it? And that person, obviously, because I'm in the well-being industry, in the wellness industry, but I'm really mindful about how that impacts, you know, my behaviors, my reactions, my responses on other people. But again, even if you just have that basic understanding, it can really shift the energy in a room and the vibes that allow for more constructive conversations, more helpful collaborations. And even when it is difficult conversations, they can be said clearly and articulately without emotional without too much emotion being put into it. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The body, you physiologically have a reaction, and it's obviously tied absolutely to your mind, you know, that. And again, you can take a moment, do a little bit of breath work, maybe a little bit of tapping. You can use tools if you know about them and your company is investing in teaching you these skills, that allows you to be much more present and considered and responding in the best way under pressure in times that matter.
Yeah, and it's so important. So a lot of it, I put a book on Amazon called Still Here, which has exercises of this sort, and a lot of it is connected to the body because we ignore it.
Mm,
And being tired has become the norm, and it's not real. It shows a level of stress that's too much. The moment it starts to ache, it's a signal
yeah,
something needs to be changed. Something needs to stop or start or whatever that solution is. But I would, for instance, because I get angry, I get triggered a lot of, and I have clients who trigger me. We as therapists, as professionals, are not without blame,
mm,
and
yeah,
we're not above human reactions. But my job is to keep to my space and say, this is not mine. How do I get back to a regulated space? Because from this regulated space, I can help
yeah,
where I am not, emotions are good, by the way, and I recognize them, but I let them fulfill, and you have the bell curve behind me, to let them go all the way. And then from a place of balance, I can actually help. It doesn't help if I get triggered, I get mad, or I get sad. And from there, I don't have resources to give to another. And I remember in my corporate days when I was so tired, I was doing so much emails, phone calls, training, other projects. When somebody asked me a simple information and I lashed out
yeah,
because I couldn't, I had no space for anything
mm,
anymore. And if somebody asked me, I said, I'm fine. Everything is fine. So there was that lie, that
yeah,
discrepancy, because you are in a really not so good space, but
yeah,
you are lying to yourself and to the world, saying you are okay. And you gave me something really a really good example with the pricing exercise, that your pricing strategy that did not work out for you.
yeah,
And you said something really, really important, and I'm going to quote you again because I liked it. You said that um, you lost something because of it. What I changed isn't the fight, it was I let losing it do to me. So, what do you do now with the self doubt in the moment so it doesn't erode you the way it did then? And tell our audience the story that you
yeah.
told me as well.
Okay, so I have definitely been would say that I've been a perfectionist in my life, and I recognize now that that was a way for me to procrastinate, maybe avoid. You know, it was a bit of an avoidance technique. You know, if I don't, but I was always I've always been really passionate about being part of a team, working to a common goal, and in this one instance that I've shared with you, there was a I was part of the senior leadership team, and there was a difference in opinion between me and the MD and the CEO on pricing structures and pricing models. And I felt very strongly that the way I wanted to price was the right way to do it, and the way that they wanted to price I felt was not right, and it was outdated, and I felt that we would be better off using my model. And that was backed up by, you know, a certain amount of research that I'd done, and looking at kind of overall financial results that could happen if we kind of um, worked with my model. But what I kind of lost in that was ultimately, the end of the story was we didn't end up operating with my model. We took the MD and the CEO's preferred model. And as part of the leadership team, I kind of had to go along with that. It was, I was part of the team that made that decision, even though I wanted a different outcome. And I had to take that back to my team. And it felt that incongruence you were talking about. I definitely felt that, but I had to still go back into my team and tell people, we're going to change our model. We're doing it like this now. And I had to be behind it. And what that did internally for me is I was kind of going, I'm not really on board with this. This isn't what I want. I feel like I didn't present my case well. I feel like I didn't do enough prep and research. I feel I didn't build my, just didn't build the case big enough. So I just went straight into that self-critical, maybe,
Imposter,
yeah,
imposter.
imposter. Maybe you're not as good as you think you are at your job. Maybe you, and and I allowed that thinking to play too much in my mind. And in the same breath, while that was going on internally, externally, I was leading a meeting going, right, so the new pricing model looks like this, But I would go, and it took up, I can't, you talked about capacity a moment ago. I can't tell you how much capacity that took. And it must have took up hours and hours of my thinking space, or particularly over that week when it first happened. Eventually I got over it because everything's temporary, right? I got over it. But at the time, on top of, whatever was going on at home with my family, on top of, I don't know, preparing for the family holiday we were going on, I had this big conversation where I was starting to feel inadequate and not very capable because my senior, my bosses didn't agree with my position. And rationally, it was a very valid, careful, considered debate we all had. And the outcome was, no, we're going to go with this. So it wasn't like they made me feel, and this is important, isn't it? They weren't saying to me I was incompetent. They were not saying I wasn't capable. They were not saying the work I presented wasn't good enough. I was saying that to me from, I don't know where, deep down inside me, where maybe when I was younger, I don't know, I've got a hangover from a teacher being critical when I was in high school. I don't know. But that's what, that's it kind of took that trust, that confidence that had, and yeah, believed in myself. And it really did start making me go, oh, and you know, I can't say for how long, but it definitely made me shrink a little bit. And I definitely had to go again, start being really aware of how I was feeling, start being really aware of being kinder to myself and going, hang on, that isn't what they didn't say that, Suzanne. They argued a different perspective. And that was a decision that was made. And that's, in business, there is sometimes a consensus that you've got to uh, kind of work to, hasn't there? And that's where tension can come in as well, to your point, Andrea. When that decision, it goes against how you feel, there's it's incongruent, isn't it? So there's tension then between your inner world and your outer world. And that can be, again, if you're not very mentally fit, or you're not very well aware, or you don't have these tools where you can help regulate yourself, or you're not sleeping, it's keeping you awake and you're exhausted, it then just turns into a much bigger thing, and it can play on repeat, and it just drives that behavior, and that self-worth. So I think if something like that happened now, again, I work on myself quite a lot. I think I might allow those fleeting thoughts, going back to your bell-shaped arc. I might go away and go, did I do my best work? Could I have, argued the point? And then if it gets to a point where I kind of go, no, I think I did all I could do, I kind of give myself a break then and go, right, well, you did your best, so let's move on. But it takes work to get to that, and it
Yeah,
takes you,
I agree.
yeah, and it takes you, to your point, to do that from a space when you're feeling. No point having that conversation when your nervous system's up here, your breathing's up here, you haven't slept for 3 nights, because you're not going to be rational. It's when you've sat with it, maybe lived it a bit, and then you can have that conversation with yourself.
Absolutely, I agree. And it's not like you don't feel the same thing because probably the trigger is so old, but you catch on a lot faster if you do the inner work. So if, let's say, when you first had it, or you had the example you gave, it took you 2 weeks to stay with yourself and
Yeah.
get to it. Now it will take you 2 days or less
Yeah.
to get to that space. And in business terms, 2 weeks compared to 2 days, it's costs time, money, and resources. So getting there a lot faster, that's a result of the work.
Yeah.
But it is work. No, and you cannot just do that and it's solved, because it's a whole process behind it. And of course, you use different tools, and
Mm.
depending on circumstances, some tools may work
Yeah.
and some tools may not. So I always say, give the different people a bag full of tools,
Yes.
different
Yes.
tools to use in different circumstances, and then test them when everything is fine, when
Yeah.
everything works,
Mhm.
so they know how to use them when things don't work. Because
Yeah.
when things don't work, the nervous system gets nervous, and you don't have space to think, to rationalize anymore. So you need those tools really ready to go, because in crisis you forget.
Yeah, of course you do.
That's why,
And
for
it's,
instance, the yeah, yeah,
sorry, I was
the
going to
the
say it's the
drills, the
capacity.
alarm drills. Yeah,
It's that capacity.
the
If
alarm
you,
drills are run over and over, so it becomes habit
Mhm.
when something does happen. Because if we do it for the first time there, we'll die,
Yeah,
literally, if something goes
exactly.
wrong.
And this is why I also, when I talk about mental fitness, I talk about exercising it to that point, because you have to exercise it when you're in a good place, but you have a moment of self-doubt, which is fleeting. It's, just remind yourself, just practice that. Practice reframes. Like you made a reframe earlier, that instead of looking at a failure as a failure, look at it as a lesson. So what did I learn? And that way you're not telling your brain that this is failure and this is what failure feels like. You're telling your brain, oh, look at this opportunity for me to learn something, that I've now adopted a new way of thinking. And that is so important, because our mental capacity, I mean, and I think for me, that's what leaders, um, particularly senior leaders, that's what they need to manage, so that they can stay well and they can handle crisis, because they're able to recognize when they're at capacity or getting full to capacity. Right? How do I empty what's going on, and give myself a little bit of capacity, because you know we've got a big week coming up. There's a chance that a client might leave us, or whatever it is they've got to deal with. Managing capacity, and I don't always think people understand how to pay attention to their mental capacity. And there's a bit more now. I don't know whether you've seen it, Andrea, but people are talking a bit more about metacognition, which is about thinking about your thoughts. So that's a real area of interest for me, that I think all businesses should be paying attention to when they're building well-being strategies for their organization. Is how are their leaders and their people leaders thinking? What's the quality of their thinking? Um, how are they managing their capacity? Because back to my point at the beginning, we don't leave what's going on in our private lives as much as we try to. But if we're going through some major life transitions, divorce, children leaving home, new parents, losing a loved one, and going through a period of grief, even though we still turn up, that is still there in our mental load, and it does mean that our thinking isn't going to be as maybe clear on that day. That doesn't mean that's going to be forever, but helping people understand their mental load and their mental capacity and how they're thinking, that's where businesses are going to get the best out of their leaders, and that's where really good leaders are going to be created, for those who understand that about themselves, and they are really working towards that.
Absolutely. It is a challenge, and it is a challenge. And
Mm.
you said something that organization don't fund embedded support because it falls between well-being and L&D budget. So that's a reality, and we need to work within that
Mm.
reality, not in the ideal, because in reality, what I hesitate to call them failures, but we do feel like they're failures, and that's the word we use for them. We do fail a lot. So there are a lot of strategies that fail. We work on something and then we try again and again and again and again. And instead of um, appreciating the cumulative effect of these lessons, of these opportunities, we feel like a constant failure.
Mm.
So, what do people do and what organizations do? They give up. So they stop, they say, this is not working. We put it in a box somewhere. This is not working. The issues remain. And again, it falls through the cracks because it's not really well-being, it's not performance, which is between learning and development and HR. It's not people, it's systems, it's a combination. It's a bit of a blame game. I'm not doing it. Maybe they are supposed to do it. If it's a joint project, who bears responsibility for what part? Because you know what? I have so many things to do. One more thing on my plate is gonna break me,
Yeah.
and it's true at a certain point. So that's why I said, and I'm really uncomfortable with this. Wait until something breaks, and then we'll deal with it when it's too late. And if we take the comparison with a disease, once you get to the doctor's office, it's already too
Yeah.
late. But again, prevention, we would like prevention, but prevention, you know what? It takes too much time, too much money. We don't know if it will work because we've had
Yeah.
bad experiences in the past. So it's all talking, by the way,
Mhm.
and everybody talks about it. Nobody actually does anything. And it's really, really upsetting. And employees suffer, which is a reality. So, have you ever had the opportunity to see a system that really works, at least partly?
Um, I think there is I think there's lots more evidence and lots more openness to coaching than they were maybe 10 years ago. Whereas 10 years ago, it might have been like a bit of a luxury or a nice to have benefit. And now I feel that's gone a lot more mainstream. And I think that's encouraging, right? Because I think coaching is a really helpful tool. But it still generally tends to be in business skills, leadership, it still tends to be that technical capabilities. Um, that's what I would say is probably a good example. And the reason that it works is because it's one to one and it's dealing with people on an individual basis. Now, obviously, training works, and for example, I'm doing a courageous leadership masterclass, and that will have maybe 20 people in the room. So you can teach kind of techniques and tools to people, start getting them thinking about this. But I think the real shift, as you will know, comes when you're in a one-to-one space and you're dealing with what specifically triggers you, what specifically are you struggling with, what specifically do you want support in. And I think coaching is leading the way to be a bit more open to that space in a slightly more, I'm not saying a therapeutic way, but more in a one-to-one well-being. So it's not about coaching you. Yeah, it is about coaching you through decisions, but we might bring a little bit more of that thinking into it, and it might be some.
Reflection.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that intersection, isn't it? So I think what's good at things like EAP schemes, we know that the utilization rate on those are quite low. I think it's between 2 and 5%, and I think that's a good way for companies to get a kind of an all company access. The reality is when you're talking about your really high performers and your leaders in an organization, they're not going to really touch that because that isn't what they need. And I know that because in my private therapy room, I am dealing with very senior people, business owners, MDs. So they are looking for that support in their own time. They're doing the research themselves and they're funding it themselves. So for me, coaching feels like it's starting to open up an avenue where we're going back to people need one-to-one access to someone who can help them have this this safe space, confidential space. And I think your point about preventative, I'm all for that as well. And it's very hard to measure that because you're preventing it, aren't you? So you're not really going to notice. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. How do you measure the success of what I do for an organization? Well, it's going to be that you're going to start noticing nutrition's less, and that your leaders are staying longer, and that the teams are feeling more, there's less people going off. But like you say, it takes too long, and then that's not an exact science, is it? So we live in a very commercial world where if you're going to spend, £4.70, can you guarantee that I'm going to get, for every pound I spend, sorry, you guarantee that I get £4.70 back? And it's really hard to do that in a preventative space, isn't it? Because like you say, the results take too long and they can be quite so I think if
And
business
you're
can,
measuring,
yeah,
you're
can you measure
measuring
it?
things that don't happen.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like proving to the Royal Mail that your parcel wasn't delivered because you can't show it wasn't. So I think, but I do think there is certain industries, certain size of businesses where, and I'm going to shift the language a little bit to talk about mental performance, is heavily invested in. You tend to see that in things like Formula One sports teams, where people's mental performance and mental game is invested in rather than waiting to be fixed. If you're a footballer, you don't want someone to be injured before you get the physio in, do you? You want to you want to make sure that they're so. I haven't got any real examples to give you other than that, but I do think coaching has started opening the idea of getting back to, or getting to a place where people get one-to-one support, and if we can take it to the next stage, which is about mental well-being and our mental resilience, it's only going to benefit businesses.
Yeah, I've noticed that people who do the work themselves are open then to talk about it in their organizations, and they create a movement there because
Yes.
they care and they experienced it on their own. It did work, so now they want to help other people in their organizations get there.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of getting the right client after all,
It is. It is.
Uh,
And
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 they can make the case for you in many
yes.
cases because they know better the reality in the field.
Yeah. And coming back to organizational structure and psychological safety in organizations, that's really important. And if you have got leaders and senior people who are, having these conversations in a very natural way, maybe in the language they're using in team meetings, and they feel very, because they're very in tune with themselves, that will create just such a, that, well, in fact, that demonstrates psychological safety. You're not just saying that, we provide that in our organization. You're living it and you're playing it and you're showcasing it. And as leaders, as individuals, going back to myself, when I went and got therapy, I was a better manager for my team because I was in a better place. And I think eventually I did tell them that, I didn't, and I don't have to go into details to why, but I think I did mention that, been getting some hypnotherapy and it's brilliant and I'm loving it. Da, da, da. But I think that demonstrated that, yes, I'm human and sometimes jobs are hard and I'm making decisions that feel very hard. I was at an event yesterday and someone used a phrase that sometimes in leadership, decisions can feel a bit like the choice between slitting your own throat or slitting your own wrist, that it feels, that's how it can feel. So I think providing psychological safety as an organization is going to be something that retains talent. It's going to be something that helps reduce presenteeism and absenteeism if they feel there's a culture and there's access to services, whether it is an AAP, whether it is someone like, referrals to people like us, where people can go and get help before, like you say, it's gone too far for them.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. We're getting close to the
Oh,
end of our conversation. I would love to talk to you more, but I promised I would stay within the hour. So I'm trying my best to not go over that.
Oh,
I
sorry.
have one last question for
Okay.
you. And what's one thing you do for your own mental fitness that has nothing to do with your work and that most people would be surprised to know?
Um, so it's not groundbreaking or shocking, so I don't think people would be surprised to know. But my thing that I do for my mental fitness is I connect with people. So every day I need a human connection, and ideally in real life one. And that's kind of it can just be it can be my family, but actually it might be a stranger on a train. It might be someone I've never met before at a networking event. It might be walking on my dog and just a small chit chat with a stranger. So I think human connection does so much for our brains. It kind of boosts your feel good hormones, your happy hormones. It does that for you. I notice on the weeks that maybe I'm a bit more isolated or I've been busy with work and I haven't got that human connection. It's days when I can be a little less secure about myself or I might question some of my decisions. Um, so connecting with people and actually if I can connect with people outside, connecting with people on my dog walks is my favorite thing. Love taking my dog out, love talking to other dog walkers or parents walking their children. And actually I really do like conversations with strangers. I think it's just really good for you. It's really good for you and really good for your soul. I think it's really nice to speak to someone. And I often think, there is a lot of people who are on their own and that might be the only conversation they've had. So connecting with humans and being human is my favorite way to stay well.
Thank you so much for being here, for participating to this discussion.
Thanks
If
for having me.
my audience wants to find you,
Yes.
where can they find you?
So my practice is called Unlock Potential. So that's www.unlock-potential. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Suzanne Teale. So love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And yeah, thanks for having me, Andrea. I'm looking forward. I was been looking forward to it. So it's been lovely. Thank you. And I hope we haven't waffled too much.
We are doing our best, and if we could have done more, we would have done more. So I'm gonna celebrate myself and you for being here today, for having this wonderful conversation. We're still running, so there is one thing still running is us today, doing a job that we like. That's also a passion, helping other people unlock their potential and releasing their subconscious programming
Yeah,
and really shining in their work and in their life and fulfilling all they are supposed to be fulfilling. So that for me is a worth a celebration. Thank
absolutely.
you. See you next time.
Thank you.